Remote work is profitable. At least that's true according to a survey by Boston Consulting Group, who looked at over 500 companies who employed a collective 26.7 million people. And companies that implemented remote work policies saw on average 4 times greater growth compared to companies that forced in-office working. And yet, you might have noticed
this is also self-evident. You don't need to measure anything. You can hire across the globe, exploit them as much as possible while cutting down on costs.
I've noticed that despite these seemingly quite shocking headline figures, companies are moving rapidly in the other direction as of late. More and more corporations have been announcing return to office orders, including Amazon most recently, which told its workers that they would have to come in 5 days a week. This was...
Well, it's part soft layout, but also they value domination, control, way more, seemingly. Which is kind of surprising for companies, for big companies. It might be part of the game.
Was incredibly unpopular with its staff. What's maybe even more surprising is that around 80% of CEOs expect a full return to office within the next 3 years. This isn't just a...
I mean, yeah, they didn't do it before, and they certainly knew about it. Remote work existed for, well, just for 20 years now, or more.
Just the private sector thing. The Canadian government recently announced a mandate requiring all federal workers to be in the office at least 3 days a week. It was met with great resistance, and yet they, much like these private companies, decided to go ahead with the change. And yet, corporations are not stupid, right? Despite the fact that this seems like it's obviously a bad move, there is some logic here. And there are some reasons why governments and private companies alike seem to be following the same policy. I think a great place to start is with Amazon, because they announced their return to office in this letter by the CEO, Andy Jassy. And this letter tells us actually quite a lot about the reasons behind it. We're going to try and translate from CEO into English. In this letter,
yeah, that's probably going to be full of bullshit.
There is one word that appears time and time again: culture. It appears like
that's domination. So they want you to have the right ideas. I mean, ideally, what they would want is that you get a house near them with a mortgage, and they teach you the right way to be. So they would want you to be the Bob who stays with the hope of advancement till you die, I guess, while you're getting very meager, if at all, promotions.
It's like 11 times and is cited frequently as the reason behind implementing this change. Culture is one of those words that's like pretty loosely defined and quite open to interpretation. In terms
let's just call it domination.
How Amazon CEO defines culture. He mentioned things like scrappiness and being joined at the hip with your teammates, which is
regardless of what it means. It means that they want you to conform to their will.
Probably closer than I want to get to most people. But specifically, I want to focus on this one word, frugality, because remote work isn't just good.
But obviously, they're going to be using positive words to describe. Well, this could also not even describe what they want you to be.
Good for growth. It obviously can lead to millions and potentially billions in cost savings. And you expect a company which is as frugal as Amazon to consider the fact that half of US workers would actually accept a pay cut for remote work. And yet, rather than do that, they would rather...
But also that's so messed up, right? You used to be getting X money, but now that your work is remote, you're getting less. I get it. Like, all workers are paid as little as possible, but sure, that's such a slap in the face.
Would rather force them back into the office. Now, despite the fact that the letter doesn't actually mention any numbers, there are other people who've actually tried to run the numbers. For example, I came across this one study which looked at Trip.com.
Because you know that they are at least saving at least 10K on you or more, while they're also giving you less.
Trip.com is like
you don't have to pay for transport, I guess. But still, that really should not be going into their pocket.
Like a $40 billion business. And they actually ran a proper academic study to measure whether the impact of working from home was positive or negative on their company. And the things they found were that working from home led to a 13% performance increase, largely due to people taking fewer sick days if they were working remote. The firm also saved around $2,000 per employee per year. And workers showed improved satisfaction and lower turnover, meaning they were less likely to quit and they were more likely to enjoy their job while they were there.
Really? Less likely to quit?
When a company that has 100 times as much to gain from just checking doesn't mention any of the numbers, it seems to almost imply that it's like just vibes, right? Was this decision made just based on vibes? Well, if you scroll down a little further into his letter, he kind of gives away the game a bit at least. So Andy Jassy says, so we're asking each S-team organization to increase the ratio of individual contributors to managers by at least 15% by the end of Q1 2025. But there are 2 ways you can increase the ratio, right? You can either hire more staff if you want managers, or you can get rid of managers. Clearly, the implication is here quite strongly that he'd like to get rid of managers. His justification for this is that it'll allow the team to move fast, clarify and invigorate a sense of ownership, and strengthen our organization's ability to make our customers' lives better.
Justifications are irrelevant.
I'm not looking to reduce the number of managers by 15%. I'm sure we can all think of a more practical reason why that might
Basically thought managers suck. Let's get rid of them.
be the case. The tech industry has been carrying out layoffs non-stop for the last year, and Amazon is a tech company much like any other. Morgan Stanley, the investment bank, published a report on Amazon just recently which found that by cutting 13,000 manager roles, they could save around $2.1 to $3.6 billion. This idea of firing people is a huge reason for the return to office movement. And there are big incentives to do it in this way, rather than to lay off people directly. A stealth layoff like this is also a way to avoid the public backlash. Amazon does not have the best public reputation as a company, and by forcing people to quit in this way, they avoid the huge reputational fallout that comes from having to fire 10,000 people. But it's not
Do they even care about that? It doesn't seem like lately companies care about that.
without any consequences. Because stealth layoffs have this habit of causing the people who quit to typically be your smartest, your best and brightest, those who actually have better options elsewhere. And the fact that
Yeah, that's a good point. You're basically selecting against your best workers.
They're willing to do this. It seems to at least go against the argument that they're trying to drive innovation and better ways of working, because better ways of working are created by your best staff members, who are the ones who are most likely to quit. Stealth layoffs have been a method that's used across the world, and I think the best example is Japan. You might not realize Japan has incredibly strong labor laws in some ways. They make it really hard to fire an employee. Even if the employee's underperforming, you have to make a real effort to show that you've tried to help them before you can fire them. It's a whole thing. So Japanese...
Yeah. They apparently like put you into some kind of solitary confinement for like 8, possibly longer, 8 hours a day. And that's it. That's your work, if they want to get rid of you.
Japanese companies have come up with this clever strategy called the banishment room. If the company wants to fire them but can't, they put them in this room, they give them the most mind-numbing
That's it.
work that they can until they get so depressed that they quit of their own volition. This is a super creative strategy.
Also, this is the strategy in Europe too, but instead of putting you in solitary confinement, they just work you to death. So you quit on your own volition.
To get around these hiring laws, and there's no reason to expect a company like Amazon to be any less creative in how it encourages staff to leave. And layoffs are one factor amongst a few, in my opinion, actually. The second arm of this return to office movement concerns commercial real estate. If you haven't been keeping track, commercial real estate has been in a bit of a bad place lately. Foreclosures jumped almost 50% in September. The value of commercial real estate has been dropping steadily as people have been evacuating from city centers, and companies are a bit mad about this. Some companies are more mad
Getting priced out of them
than others. Amazon bought, just before the pandemic fully kicked off, a brand new building in New York City for $1.15 billion, a building which sat empty for most of the pandemic and has only just opened. It's not just a problem for the egos of the people who greenlit these projects, but it's also a big...
Sure, there are some who would like to lord over the workers. It's like, yes, look at how superior I am. But it's all about profit, right? And control.
A big problem because of tax. Infamously, Amazon almost got $3.5 billion in subsidies from the state of New York to build a new HQ. And the only reason this didn't happen was due to huge public backlash. The justification for these huge tax rates is that building such offices adds lots of jobs to the local economy. Backlash.
What was that?
To build.
So, got $3 billion from the state. I don't like socialism for companies, though.
Build a new HQ. And the only reason this didn't happen was due to huge public backlash. The justification for these huge tax rates is that building such offices adds lots of jobs to the local economy. It adds lots of economic activity, from transport to food to all of these different industries that supposedly benefit. How much it works out when you actually work out the cost per job is more debatable. But this is just one case.
And the whole point is that people go there. I mean, they just pay for a lot of services. They eat nearby. And if they stay home, then that's not going to happen. Like, but the whole problem here, that really should not exist, is that they got $3 billion from the state.
Case amongst many. Some of these tax breaks often come with occupancy and job creation requirements. So you need to create a minimum number of jobs, and your workspace needs to be pretty full most of the time. And this is big money. Amazon got very close to getting over $3 billion from New York alone. And you can imagine what this works out to when you multiply it across the planet. And to be fair, having them full not only gives them these tax breaks, it also looks good. Because let's be real, part of the return to office movement is driven by ego as much as anything else. Empty offices do just look bad if you're a manager. It's a very visible and tangible thing to point to in case of...
If you're the kind of manager who stand behind people and your idea of productivity is people just spending time and seeing butts in seats, then you're just terrible. Quit now.
Case of other failures that arise, especially if you're an executive. You got to account...
Especially if you got a bit of an ego and like, oh yeah, look at me, I'm the superior one.
For the fact that, aside from all of the numbers of it, executives are also people, and they're subject to the whims that people have. And I think this can actually, in a lot of cases, be more important than the actual facts of the matter. There's another return to office case that really strengthens this idea that perception is, in large part, more important than reality when it comes to return to office. And that is the case of the Canadian federal government. They are beholden.
I don't know. I think we are possibly overvaluing optics. Most companies really just care about profits. And smaller companies would not really care about this. They would just like, okay, remote work, cheap workers, like, yeah, let's go.
Beholden to a very different set of constraints, a very different set of pressures that has somehow led them to the same conclusion as Amazon. The Canadian government, much like Amazon, released very few numbers or very little data to support their decision to mandate this 3-day in-office type of situation. And they simply, much like Amazon, cited something that can be roughly translated to vibes. But that's not where it ends.
Also, there is an idea out there, I'm just going to call it that society is highly interested, or government is highly interested, and businesses are highly interested in keeping people busy. So, and permeated with the right ideas.
Where it ends, because
if they just stayed home and did their work in 10 hours, and otherwise they just had 90 plus hours per week just to figure out, we might be figuring out the wrong things.
The public union that represents these federal workers submitted freedom of information requests and were able to find out more about the decision-making process behind this. They obtained like thousands of pages of documents from the federal government, which explained some of the research that they'd done, what data they had, and what data they didn't have. And I thought that it was super, super interesting to see the conclusions of what this data actually said. One presentation was presented to the Chief of Human Resources for the Canadian federal government, and it suggested that they had three options for how to move forward with their working policy. They could either go mostly on-site, they could either go scheduled, which is a prescribed model of hybrid work, or they could go flexible first, which encouraged people to remote work. And this
is all bullshit. I mean, as long as you can... It needs to be done. It can be done remotely. It should be done remotely. If it needs to be done on site, then it should be done on site. That's it, right? This is how you get most money.
Document made a specific recommendation. It actually suggested to the chief of HR that they go for flexible first. It achieved the desired outcome to a great extent. Their own research found that remote work was the best option for them. And yet they decided to not go with it, which is bizarre. It becomes less bizarre when we look at the downsides that they describe of a remote first policy. Specifically to...
I don't really care about such papers because it's just bullshit. Like,
two impacts. It's an open secret that businesses that operate downtown would like to see workers back in the office. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, which represents a whole load of Canadian corporations, has been lobbying for the last 2 years to encourage federal workers back into the office. And this has not been done in secret or anything. If you don't know who Doug Ford is, he's the political leader of a Canadian province. And this is a quote from him.
Why are you asking the Prime Minister to call on federal workers to return to the office full time?
Well, that's pretty simple. You got to get the economy going downtown. These restaurants are hurting, the shops are hurting, anything to get the economy going in ridership.
Give them money.
There's been like an open...
Yeah, but that's so stupid. Okay, let's engage with this argument. People should be traveling to work and back every weekday. Big two, stimulate the restaurants. What the fuck? That's so stupid. It would make more sense if those who are running the restaurant stay the fuck home. Those who were having these jobs stay the fuck home. That's it. I figured it out.
Open push from government to encourage economic activity in downtown centres, not by incentivizing people to go there, but rather by obliging them to go there. The second external impact that seemed to drive the Canadian government away from its own recommendation to stick with remote is public perception.
Even if I was remote working, and you were some chump, right? I don't know, selling hot dogs, I would want you to just be home, do whatever you want instead of selling me hot dogs. I don't care. I don't care if you're not doing anything productive. Like, should you be like out there trying to sell hot dogs? That's really not gonna help you that much. I would just rather be at home, right? Like, what kind of world are we heading toward? Like, I have to go to work to maybe you can sell me a hot dog. What the fuck is that?
Perception and scrutiny, which is actually a huge factor. Because if you made it this far, I presume that you're generally in favor of workers having the choice to be remote or to appear in person. But that's not actually a common sentiment. When it comes to federal workers, a lot of people really, really don't like them. In fact, 6 out of 10 Canadians support a federal return to office mandate.
What the fuck? Is this real? I guess some propaganda may have influenced this take.
Interestingly, around 80% of Canadians think remote work is a good thing when you ask them about themselves, and yet 6 out of 10 seem to support a return to office for federal work.
It's a little sus.
Governments are hugely incentivized to do what looks good over what's effective, and it can drive actions that are against their own actual research and that simply look good. In the documents, the Canadian federal government makes reference repeatedly to this idea of global and jurisdictional trends, effectively justifying their return to office movement because everybody else is doing it. All the private sector companies are doing this return to office, and therefore...
But that's the stupidest thing, right? Like, that's not a reason. Like, oh yeah, why are you doing it? Because the other guy's doing it, and they're doing it because you're doing it. This is not a reason.
Therefore, it doesn't reflect well on the government if their federal workers can sit at home while everyone else is going into the office. That's at least their justification. So what if they actually follow the data? What world would that lead to? This one study of federal workers...
I don't think... Okay, I get that. You know, I like data too. But, like, this is kind of an issue that you don't need data for.
Which was carried out after this return to office mandate, found that in Quebec, the emissions of workers who stayed remote were 64% lower compared to
no fucking way.
In-person workers. Remote work has this huge outsized benefit on society as a whole because it makes the workplace a lot more inclusive to a huge range of people who might not be able to work otherwise. It allows people with young children to do a full-time job. It allows people who have particular disabilities that may impede their mobility to do a full-time job. And
yeah. What a good point. Yeah. All the big talk about like, oh yeah, you know, we care about the autistic people. Oh, we care about the disabled people. Some bullshit. They don't. Right? It's all talk.
And overall, there's clearly just a huge benefit.
Y'all care about the environment? Absolutely not.
But that's a very politically unpalatable thing to do. The people who are doing these mandates have their justifications, but they're also human, and therefore they are subject to the same whims all humans are. They're subject to wanting to protect their ego, to wanting to feel like the big man in many ways.
Yeah, no, I don't think this is a good take. He is kind of like dismissing it. They have good reasons, no doubt. It is driven by self-interest and desire to control and profit.
Ways and to wanting to preserve their sense of identity. It can be tempting to think of all corporations as perfectly rational, but as long as they're operated by people, they'll be subject to the whims of people's egos.